possible. All right. So abstract oralism, in fact, is Yamini's very, very bold and ambitious attempt to transfer into verse her ancestral land of Kachch, and by recalling the ancestry of the land, by retelling the history of the land, history not in terms of who ruled and from which date to which date, but rather the history of the people of the land, and to cover and their struggles for survival and how they adapt to changing circumstances over the ages. Apart from that, she covers the topography of Kachch, which in fact is a vast stretch of land, not uniform in its topography. And because there are grasslands, there are deserts, there are mangroves, there's the coast. And while talking about the coast, of course, we cannot forget the importance of water, which Yamini brings in. Importance of water, which shapes, in fact, the civilizations or the cultures and traditions that locate themselves around either water itself or the lack and scarcity of water. Both of these things are impress upon people who live in that land, and that Yamini has tried to bring out in this particular book. Apart from which the topography.
हाँ, गेट पे हो। मेरा आज एक पैकेट और आने वाला है, ठीक है? वो गार्ड को भी बोल देना जो ड्यूटी पे है, ठीक है? अच्छा, ठीक है।
Sorry about this.
No, that's okay. One of the fallouts of the new technologies. It could happen in a physical reading as well. I think Yamini is hinted that someone has something very important to speak about. Anyway, so we were talking about the topography of the land of Gujarat, of Kachch, and how the topography has shaped the professions, the trade, and the language. And the language, in fact, is one very, very special thing about what Yamini has attempted in this book, is to try and incorporate in really pretty much a seamless, fluid kind of way, the language that is native to Kachch. So all of that, and what is forming the mainstay, I would think, of Yamini's book, is through all of this, while highlighting all of these things, she is also always conscious about the role that women have played in the whole development or non-development of these various topographies in Kachch. And the results of what one would say in quotation marks development, what development has meant for the people who are settled in these lands and what it implies. So in that sense, then I would think this is a very, very ambitious book, and Yamini has totally carried off her experiment to great success. I will start by reading a small portion of the beginning, which introduces in a way the protagonist, which I would like to know from Yamini whether this protagonist is herself or a generalized C in this particular, I don't know, I don't think we have the visuals, but in that language, C is perhaps the equivalence of C. Yes, there it is, correct. So I read. C unearthed her lineage gathered it like fallen pomegranates, lying valueless in herd horticulture, sifting through soiled pages of an anti-modern abridged dictionary. See pronoun, regional, dialectical, linguistic, cultural variation and abrogation of she in standard English. C, denoting the third in a set of items, categories, or size. C, origin, derivatives, archaic, corresponding to Semitic gimel, which probably derived from an early sign for a camel. C, spiritual, receptiveness or openness. C, Roman, the numeral 100. C, rhyming with to see and the sea. Geographical, upper shape of Kachch and the Allaband, fault. C, view, transgression of sea or submergence in the recent geological era. Surface of Kachch exhibiting itself in terms of dark brown surface, configuration with wide and deep cracks with veneer of salt. And lastly, C, colloquial, informal, slang, square, not literally make a fool. C, uncrossed her legs and climbed atop a people for a grounded aerial view. What a beautiful introduction, Yamini. Congratulations. Um, so Yamini, we were speaking about recalling ancestry and retelling history through this book. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that?
Thank you so much, Anjali, for this beautiful reading of C. It seemed like a character altogether. As you read it, it just came to life. I would like to thank Asiatic Society for allowing us to hold this discussion and allowing us to have the entire scope that we could deal with whatever we wanted. To answer to your question, which you asked earlier as to who C is that C, for that matter, could be the witness or an aspiration for those who love their motherland. And motherland, for that matter, could be any place, location, even a tree, or the home cooked maa ke haath ka khana, what home means. So C over here is aware of the Anthropocene, but not much, because it is in reality actually the capital O scene which is affecting it. The irony here is when you break the word scene, the capital O scene or the Anthropocene, where scene itself is not recent enough. There's this slow simmering, the back burner kind of feeling which the place Kachchh has. It's like the leeward side of a mountain where when the cloud after dropping all the rain in the windward side just has few things remaining. And that's how development works in underdeveloped districts like these. So C reveres the nature, tradition, ancient knowledge systems, be it in water management or salt desert cuisine. She knows what power of the written word is. She knows her bold propriety. She rejects post-modernity for anti-modernism. And in fact, she's for every reader to repurpose and to seek in their own individual, regional, communitarian, or national quest to find what or make meaning out of it. So that's what C would stand for, to each his own. And to answer the second bit of the question is about the topography. Now, Kachchh, usually in Kachchi, Kachchh is understood as a Watan, the Indian Hindi understanding of a Watan, which is a nation. So they always understand Kachchh as this nation in itself, all encompassed within itself. So this kind of territorial identity which Kachch has, is under the larger rubric of nationalism, which may consist of perennialism, primordialism, or ethno-symbolism, wherein the pull of the particular location comes from the dilemmas of the human condition. Now, if we tie this to other questions on the elemental requirements of community, territory, history, and a sense of future, with the emphasis made by modernists on its shaping being on evolution rather than construction, we understand that identity, for that matter, is made up of nation, state, gender, race, humanity, and also some abstract ones. So territory over here emerges and it shapes the various ways in which chapters come through. And so they are trying to grapple with the immediate identity, the topography around them, as well as considering that location as a nation in itself, as well as under the larger.
Nothing. It's not even zero. It's like minus. It's very hard to be a good actor.
All right.
Yeah, I think to explain the and give this a historical context, should I read a poem, Nevro?
Nevro, that will be,
Yeah.
yes, Yamini.
Nevro, Kachchh state circa end of 1819. Usual practice, empty droplets from buckets before letting in fresh water. Pour mugfuls in contemplation. Jesma odd, dug Talaudi. Pastimes aplenty, handmade reservoirs picked. Royal commissions, loyals executant. Artisanal tools not horsing around, chiseled figurines with prehensile trunks and flowing manes as markers for water level and anecdotal lessons in storage. Exurge, only read. Rao Hamir, 1471 to 1524, Memento Mori. Reign of Rao Kengarji 1, 3, and so on. Gaidhar, Jairam Ruda. Mistri struck off. And as minimalism set in here too, it didn't quite reveal the true essence of animalistic sanctions, but rain gauge at Hamisar Lake precipitated Megh Laddu apportions.
Lovely. And similarly, because we were talking about the shape and the fault, there were two more poems that maybe I'll read one and you will read one,
Sure.
Yamini. I'm
Yeah.
referring to your two poems which stand side by side. One is called Quake, Allah Ban Fault, 1819 to 2006, and Watered Down. I'll read Watered Down first.
Sure.
From Monday, from Monday to Friday, see hand-rounded Khadir, Bajarji, Mani, gray confrontation barbed wire at line of control, staples for dinner, vegetables for an occasion, especially swimming in a watery sauce. Who would go straddling across the desert 19 kilometers to grab some cluster beans, camel-like? Kachchi beer accompanied anything, anytime, a test of water immunity. Roadside dabeli and kadak only made people athirst. Pakwan and the winding struggle for water, Gulab Park and the luxury to have roses from Jodhpur, as long as it floats and hydrates, its salt desert cuisine. that honestly is so much compacted into so little, Yamini. I must congratulate you on this poem. Might you tell us the context in short and read Quake for us? Page 72. Ramesh, could you unmute? Ramesh, could you unmute Yamini, please?
Yeah, actually, yeah, you have disallowed me to unmute. So,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had gone on mute.
yeah, I'm doing that so that
Yamini is not
is
muted.
not disturbed.
It's fine, it's fine. Yes, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah. Quake. Allah Band Fault, 1819-2006. Landscape on the right. Erosion lines through capillary action, crossways wrote of an uprising. Sindhu. View on the left. Memories resurface, appear weary of movements and flows in topography. To be let awash by the throes of nature and or rise, remain and rewind. Surrounded by the teal, the ochre stood its ground. This also speaks a lot about the history, the geographical history, and how that has shaped Kachchh a lot. I mean, the Kachchh that was before, it's the everything which is related and talked about Kachchh is always in reference to the earthquake, which was in 1819 and the one which was in 2006. So for now, every memory is always before earthquake and after earthquake. And if you talk to people, they always feel that the Kachchh before earthquake was much better, is because it was pretty calm and composed in that manner as a city and as people. But after the calamity struck, I mean, fortunately for them, so much aid came in, but that made them, the city, in just teeming with development and so many people, that it has affected the peace and calm. So, you know, every major event brings in a lot of changes, and this is one of them.
Right. And we tend to kind of not really think of Gujarat so much as being a border, but in fact, it's a very long expanse of Gujarat that does form the border, and so the politics of being in such a strategic position, plus the topography which you have, in fact, in great length described, but I think time will not for us to go into that. But each topography, the grasslands, the coastline, the mangroves, the plains, and then the desert. All of this is almost a panorama of various kind of land. And what might you say how has these various, because we cannot go one by one, but if you could put it together, how it has shaped the language and the social relations, apart from, of course, the land holdings, patterns of these various areas of Kachchh.
So what happens is, the price for being attuned to nature is utter vigilance. And when people who live here are so attuned to nature, their livelihoods get affected, and it has consequentially affected the structure of the book. So for me, while I was doing my research, it was going to different places. I mean, I didn't have that in my head when I was doing the research, that, you know, this is how the book will turn out to be. But when I sat down to write, things came in various ways. It formed a structure in each poem in itself. But when I placed a set of poems together, and I understood that location and the topography of where it came from, the kind of characteristics that people have, the kind of professions that they follow, it all made a different pattern altogether. And in fact, it is also a way of introducing people to this landscape, that amidst so much variety and such difficult terrains of being in the border, having a desert, a salt desert run with the coastline, I mean, and all of these things that people thrive and go on. And to specifically refer to the question of languages, which you mentioned, Anjali, is that, I mean, from time immemorial, we've been seeing that languages develop for for various reasons. Say, for example, in Mesopotamia, it was for centralizing power in cities, or in Assyria it was to access the source code of power, or for example to access minds of others, to interpret religious literature, for being and just as an identity, as it was for Marusaki Shikibu or for Akhmatova and her poem in Russia. So here, this language in Kachch, the Kachchi, which is not even a language, is a dialect. It is primarily for trade. It matters to them how the agility of the syllables, the mastery of quick succession of words, the swiftness of utterances. And what happens is the end, I mean, after having this very, very fast spoken language with monosyllables, is that it still remains a corridor language, a dialect. So, these are all the things that play to affect the structure and the choice of language in this book.
That's lovely. I think there is a very nice poem about about precisely what you're saying, the predominant use of a language, coupled with then, if it is a language of say trade, then you are trading with people who perhaps don't share that language, but in that trading, the languages also get shared and intermingle. And similarly, then you have this poem called Sampdili. Urdu and Kachchi in the same breath, as Aranmula mirror, rare and unaware, osmotic membrane, dare and bear, representation unfair, passe affair. You read into an undivided land, Beshak. 1928 born Rukhsar, while sorting fishes, gives guarded responses only when young Akhtar asks, does she relent? Partition memories may or may not simmer, accounts. Rekha and Ibteda play bhadi bhadi, unawares, when children actually are not aware of these things. And while talking about trade, and we were speaking about the book, Yamini, you have a poem, but I think we might not read it. But I would like to touch upon this very important person who we do not read about so much in our history and our textbooks about land, who was an aid to various explorations. And in that sense, then, because we are staying in Bombay thinking that, oh, this is a land which is so alien to us, but immediately we find so many similarities in your book and in the local settlements that have been the history of Mumbai, that I would like you to speak about that particular person.
So this is about Kanji Malam, who is supposedly the person who led Vasco da Gama to India, and he was so well versed with the entire sea trade and the sea locations and the directions that it was by heart. and he was considered to be the only person who could know everything so easily. So he was a Kachchi, and he holds a very important position in the history of navigation. And that being said, as you mentioned, Anjali, that language had to be that fast, that just in monosyllables things had to be just spoken, and trade had to be done. So it is through this mindset of trade and business that this entire region flourished, with a whole lot of inflow, outflow, and which created in a sense this heterogeneous mix of what Kachchis revere as their Kachchi beer, chas, which when it's like churned, and it creates that kind of layers of the makhan on the top and chas left below. So these are various ways in which we understand Bombay, as well as how Kachch came to be what it is today.
Yes. So you are reminded of saline notations and a poem that you have, perhaps a part of it, or if you wish, the whole of it. It would be beautiful to read at this point. Yamini, could you read that?
Which one?
Iambic monometer.
Okay, yeah. This poem is in 5 parts, and it speaks of the language in various aspects. I'll read part 1. And she imagined herself drawing an alpana outside her home, releasing salt with restraint, shaping infinitesimal words she mugged before dropping out of school for marriage, as she knew how to sign. She made the Kachchua. Second part. Noche mi me pi saro luhi body kecho muso dodi. This is an entire conversation in itself. Part 3. Skr skr sir whack stwack chwack swing shma. Or aside, lo ne drop it in coats and jutes, ru kappa cha mu so he who. Part 4. You try it, I said. It is an idiolect, micro-dialect, hurried, prescient, precocious, and upturned like the tip of a mojari. Part 5. She cradled its stiff spine in her palms and heaved herself up over a decorated ledge to recite a rhyming couplet after a year.
Very nice. And just to end it with a small, another very small poem, Spezzatura. Would you read that after that? I think it kind of follows the two.
I roamed around to find it, but all was carefully crafted. Each sequence painstakingly placed, lauding legacy and tradition in a small heap of salt, soddened and taking on color.
Beautiful. So then we come to your perception of women's work in these various different kinds of landscapes. And what is the role they play in that work, and how does that particular role that they play in, say, herding of cattle, or in salt making, or any of the 4 or 5 distinctions that you have made, how has it shaped their position within the household and within society? And what kind of other outlets that they find for themselves apart from the work?
So there are various ways in which women have been equal contributors in households as well as the economy. And one of the things which stands out very strikingly for people outside of Kachch is the kind of embroidery, which is actually a mode of expression of these women. Embroidery in various forms. I mean, there are hundreds of various patterns and designs and styles in which it is done for each and every community, very specific to them. So when I spoke to few of these women sitting on the charpai outside their homes, this 4-5 women of them were sitting and giggling and chatting and enjoying themselves. It is usually the men are away from their homes, either moved out to some other country, or they're usually away for trade and they're not home for a very long time. I'm talking about a few sects of people. So for them, this time together in the evening when they're done with all their household chores is that they weave their stories onto the cloth, which are earlier it was only for their own children to be given as dowry. But now it's more for trade. So the better you are well skilled and the ancient art motifs that you use and the importance of each, which are very auspicious, the more price it fetches, the more it is delicate and minute. And so there are various ways in which that is understood. Apart from that, even if they are fisher folk or salt gatherers, equal participation is seen by women in various fields that they occupy. It's not understood as if they occupy a subservient position. But of course, in some trades it is like this, but in some it's a very different situation, which is the case in many other places. I mean, most other places as well. So their stories and what they weave it with is a way in which, I mean, this is in fact the understanding of the title itself, the oralism aspect of their stories and how they find expression. That's how it works.
That's so true. And in fact, there is both these poems, The Run of Kachchh and Embroidered, which speak about this. Apart from, of course, you have also touched upon the Ajrak the printing process. That is one of the, but that we might not have time to go into over here. But as you were speaking, I was reminded of, the traditional inhabitants of Mumbai, who were the fisher folk, the coolies. And in their community as well, it was the fisherman who went out in the boats for fishing, brought home the fish. After that, the entire process was handed over to the women. The women cleaned and sorted, and if they dry, it is the women who do that. And they were totally involved in the selling of fish. And that still holds to a very, very large extent, which I think also mirrors partly the coastal communities in Kachch. Is that true?
Yes, only the last bit where the women go out to sell is different in this case, is because here the men go because they have to go far away. The land place where fishing is done is very far away from where it is actually sold. And this is usually done by freezing. It's not sold fresh mostly. By drying, not freezing.
Drying, yes.
Yeah, so they do the drying and the sifting and sorting and all of that, but not the selling so much.
Also in the herding community, is it the same? How, because I do think there is some reference in one of your poems to the cattle market. Would you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, so women look after them all along. They look after the cattle. They are the only ones to whom they will obey, the animals. But when it comes to the trade of how much the price that the animal will fetch, or how much will it be, or where will be traded in the animal pashu melas which they hold every year, is only attended by men. It's a totally male affair, and only men with their strongest sanchori or Kankraj, that's the pure breeds which are there in Kachch. They would come there. They have their very masculine wrestling game which happens, which is Bakma Lakhdo, and you won't see a woman in sight.
Okay.
So she's left back in her bhungo, far away. And
we'll go back to the embroidered, because this is a particularly beautiful poem. I read. Embroidered. Expressive puncture, a soof here, a chovario there, squatting outside hutments, resisting lonesome patriarchy, with giggles, needling, kneading, dying, tying, a pinch of taste, ensign waves, panoramic famine and polychromatic aesthetics, a not quite noumenal warp and weft, yet total, dilettantish bonhomie, an emotional anchor down long viral absences, intimacies of the weave, eternally salted mirage of the mind, unhinged.
you wove it like it's, it's done.
Then there is the Ran of Kachch, which you have. Would you like to read that? Yamini?
Yeah, sure. The Runwood Surf is the highlights of Kachch, and this is one thing which was done to revive the economy of Kachch after the earthquake. And there are days when the festival is affected because of rainfall. So Run of Kachch. Bromide extraction, pinkify. Camel hooves the distances for an unbridled sunset. Exhibits line military borders, handiwork hung on clothesline. Kachchi folk inclined, circle aligned. Sealant Runwood Surf leaks in unseasonal rain, and wet housecoats reclaim their place.
And there's one more, Yamini, Appearance and Reality 1, which I think has reference to the women.
So I'll read the first part.
Whatever you feel like. We have time that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I want to add a few things before I read this poem, or maybe I'll do this after this poem. Appearance and Reality 1. To embody civility, propriety, and modesty seemed effortless for her. Situated within matrices of humans herded in a tufan, being attired in virtuosity and bareness, arrayed with adornments toda that seemingly aid in reproduction, accoutred with nagli, vatla, and kamarpattu, showy yet beneficial traditional lure. As winds billow through her black stole and goal at revealing the posterior, the signifier of backward radical feminism, subterfuge for identity, tradition, isomorphic socio-sexual relations, body supplement, kanjri, creates a microphysical environment, interacting, altering ambient body temperature, concentrating water vapor, balancing temperature and water balance. As an interface, deflecting harsh sunlight and thrusting cold wind, blouse that reflects sunlight, deflects mirrored beauty, and simplicity of recognition by rule, followed simply inexorable indigeneity. A cross-stitch of Bath's object of appearance, untying restraints of Himani Banerjee's subjective regulator, textile prison. A weave of exquisite cloth patches tacked together by her mother from birth until solemn matrimony, sewing all the impressions frontally, yet always ensuring she will have her back in person, or maybe she has the strength to withstand it all bare-backedly.
Lovely. Most times they do have. Most times she has, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are no options but to see through whatever they are facing. You wanted to speak about something else?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to link the question that you have, that you asked about women, because women over here also symbolize a very close connection to water. So, would you like to reflect on it with relation to Kachch, with relation to Bombay before we come to Kachch?
No, you go then. I'll
Kachch.
see if there's
Okay,
something to
okay.
add.
Okay, so particularly in abstract oralism, women and water, they are the overarching and underlying allegories. Their dialogues, the direction of water flow inform every tertiary dynamic of the book. Ecology of water impacts the political and cultural transitions, with centralized control over irrigation remaining at the heart of hydraulic societies like India. So it's this history of the water which has led to making it the prime signifier here. So this is interspersed with the erasure of the tradition of historical writing, which was done earlier. And that was swept by the cultural history writing. And what was left behind at that time was rural history. So people all turned to urban histories and intellectual histories. And what happened at this time, as we read in Sunil Amrit's Understanding in Unruly Waters, is that the people were caught unawares by a mounting water crisis, which was soon to be an existential threat. Now, abstract oralism reflects a sense that water has value beyond ideology, politics, and history. And C over here, who represents women as well as water. She also represents this fluidity, to be able to move, weave back and forth through the various strata, topography, changing development, and other political or cultural upheavals. So, it's this woman and water which just flows through this entire collection.
Yes, it does. It does, in fact. And especially the water politics is something that that takes whatever power that women had over water resources and vests it in a foreign source, which is not directly related or connected to the land. And that, I believe, is so true, even say in a place like Bombay, where eventually it was a garden. Mumbai, the land was very, very fertile. And there were wells almost in every second house when they were houses and not buildings. And along with more and more higher buildings coming up, land water has depleted. In fact, it's heartbreaking to see those pumping, pumps that they put on any large construction site in Bombay to pump out water and to build their concrete structure, which also dams up the underground water systems and I'm sure that happens in various ways also in Kachch. And here, when these small wells were there in every second compound, it was in fact, the women who took that water and built their little kitchen gardens and their own produce, and all of that is being taken away. Which brings us to
what you're saying is so important, is because this is the same situation that we see with Narmada flowing there, and the river which is very close to us, the Mithi near BKC, and the politics of that kind, that the rivers don't follow any human borders, but the kind of political influence, have that material influence on waters, is something that we need to really ponder about. So this change in scenario, as you see, I just want to read a very short one, which is called Deeper, Anjali, page 9, which reflects this changing scenario, which could be true even for Bombay, Mumbai, or Kachch. Deeper, part 1. Drowning figurines saw performing figures step by step, joined by pigeons from alcoves later. Part 2. Circular bricks, opaque aquarium, viewed with a hunch. Part 3. Seated, bloated, bored.
Bored as in
the boring water.
Yes, of course. And one only has to think of the step wells, where it was available to the whole community. When now, if you have to bore a well, then it is your own. And therefore, these very communal resources are slowly getting privatized or vanishing completely.
It was also this situation in, even Ambedkar fought for it a lot. And this situation was also there in Kachch, and it was with respect to religions, that various people from a particular religion were not allowed, because of their own household restrictions, to be able to take part in these water committees. And it was only much later that they were allowed to do so. So a lot of governmental interventions by creating that kind of lok bhagidari in pipification of rural landscapes and regions helped in making people more aware and more to be able to own that water, that this is ours and we need to look after it. Changed a lot of things.
Yes, true. In fact, when we were speaking about trade, we were to read this very lovely poem about the market, Panjarpol, which would you care to read it, please?
Yeah, sure. Panjarpol, part 1. Low-spirited below, sensing pain ended Bhagyo's furlough. His footsteps moved, dividing least common multiple on both sides. Examination of breed, disease, severity, and feasibility, failing in all to trade the sanctuary, both the parties squeezed Bhagyo's hand twice under the handkerchief of muted deals, parting with the best compliments from engraved trough. Part 2. Numbed bull fantasized Icelandic Viking horses, Kachchh Kankraj cattle, unforgiving landscapes carving pure breeds, parched agricultural lands teeming with dairy gluts, differently abled pals, and the tender bovine care, thought Kadak Singh, in motion, tied with 4 ropes. Part 3. Only Samri knew burden logistics of Nar Oot for migration, taming a Halari donkey and prescribing healing cared. In connection to the questions that you asked me earlier.
Indeed. So we come to one a sort of a concluding part of our conversation, but I cannot let you go without one very important aspect which you have consistently covered and which for me personally also is very important when you study any land and its people. Which is this question. Of course, you spoke about development and, village communities doing something for water, which in fact, even in Maharashtra or a little outside Bombay, it does happen. Nevertheless, in most cases, indigenous communities and their relation with development is not always so friendly. Often it is inimical. And what we have seen, say, if we come back to Mumbai, is that once a settlement has gone, say, when during, say, slum demolitions where they were given alternate sites, most of them were given alternate sites in places which were uninhabitable, which were marshy land. I'm talking about, say, the history of the growth of Mumbai, marshy land, which they would fill and build their huts, and slowly the small roads, small shops, and other establishments. And once that land became pakka, as they say, it develops a value. And when and that happens also, say, in when you speak about the salt pans and the salt lands, there are salt pans in Mumbai, which there is, I don't know if it is already done, but there is talk that they will be removed, taken over by development, as you say, So the contradiction here being that as the value of land goes up, the people who have originally owned that land are disenfranchised, and they have to move from there, which then, of course, you have spoken about it in various poems. I'd like to read one called Being Left Behind. Marked in coordinates 23 degrees by 19 north to 23 degrees 52 north, and 68 degrees 56 east to 70 32 east, wetland, dryland, wasteland, bunny, in its jaded mellowness, flashed with banners, annual Pashu Mela. Cattle make no note of time, nor do its possessors, and those over them in a loop of continuum. So it is that lawsuits have been unsuitably over time. Like the omnipresent Saraswati, menfolk arrive in all her absence, trading in buck malakado. Meanwhile, a plinth reads, geography participates every day, and linguistics flattens into cartography, degenerating eco-capital. Although women folk build the bungo after every internal migration, being its matriarch is unheard of. In the vastness and in its emptiness, seated away by dammed rivulets, staring at blurred, briny waters, focusing on the excrescence on the blade of grass. See, anthropocentrally catechizes, why can't I be a gando-bowered, meandering seamlessly in the Simado? So poignant, so poignant. There's another one, Yamini, called Money Order, which I would be very happy if you might read.
Okay, I'll give you a little bit of background which is related to being left behind. There was this is about the grassland of Banni, which was gifted by the Jadeja king for grazing to the Maldhari community. Now, this particular land, it has this Grasdhar system of administration, where each of the 23 sub-ecoregions of Kachch were given, and they were essentially reared for cattle, and they would graze in a specific piece of land in a particular season before the limits of overgrazing. Now they would internally migrate to another location to allow nature to grow and recuperate. There were these customary rules which were set up for grazing and management of that common grazing area based on the interdependence between communities and a deep understanding of the ecosystem. Now, owing to the high spatial variability in rainfall, villages that receive rain do not restrict entry of pastoralists from other villages into their grazing areas, since sharing of resources is an indispensable value among the people of Banni. There was this use of pancheri, which was the grazing task, which was given in exchange for the right to graze to the king. Now there was this sustainable arrangement which was made until the appropriatory forest laws, when forest was started to be understood as this resource, and that's something which has to be consumed, and it got value laden to it in monetary terms, is when all the things started changing. Now one of the things which happens in this situation is that we have a lot of these proletarian revolutions leading to territorial, cultural, political, and economic cosmopolitanism. And the most important thing over here, which then is oral histories, and how to ensure that each and every person is equally represented and understood, is by not allowing each voice to be diluted in this understanding. Even, for example, when oral histories are understood even by oral historians, they usually generalize the data that, okay, we have taken the sample of 100 people and this is what we have come to an understanding. But in this process, that the importance to that one particular individual and what he has to say about his land. Say, for example, a Maldhari in this situation and their land, this Banni, becomes very diluted, and that people don't get to express themselves or bring their point across to the right person. So that's when things, start to become very difficult for them to be able to represent themselves. And Money Order, in that sense, is a very empowering poem, and it gives women their due. It's about...
In fact, when you spoke about the grazing areas in the heart of Mumbai, Charni Road itself was a piece of land that was donated by a gentleman, I believe, of the Parsi community, for the cattle to graze in, and that is where the word Charni comes from. Charna, Charni, and Charni Road. Not that there was some person called Charni. It's just an aside.
Yeah, in fact, today itself, as you mentioned, Aditya Thackeray has mentioned that they will not be giving up the mangroves and the salt pans for development. They are going to retain it.
I'm glad. I hope it stays that way.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, so you're reading Money Order.
Yeah, so moving from nature to the actual economics of the situation. Stagflation years, a stern letter to in charge of finances, culled from memory as 1976. Penmanship in sanctioned state language. Apra deshni parasthiti sa માટે આવી. કયો મૂરખ માણસ અહીંયા પૈસા મોકલાવે. When no clinking penny or even its sizzle reached across ports without calculative, table-to-table, down-to-up bankable paperwork, such rebuttal beckoned the addresser to official treasury. In times of unwarranted confrontation policies backed by provocative action, reviving economy was prioritized. Seeming dissent burst out at its seams. What makes you say so? With a know-all poise of a government officer, Mangalji adjudged the looming look and began placing his words like laborious stones by a deductive reasoning. Verily sampling cases of scooter prices to export licenses, pausing occasionally to inquire upon his awareness and wakefulness. Stately replies came forth. Khyal che. Bewilderment and curiosity set in to the point of getting to the point. Remittance economy. Lone migrants working as factotums unwillingly entrusted foreign bolts. Mangalji claimed to raise 10 crores in hinterland and raised 100 in 1/12 of its time. Economists raised brows and graphs in erased absence of harmonic booms. Mrs. did not wait there in bereavement, instead added her rupia and let the interest accrue, making Madhapur the richest village in Asia.
Lovely, lovely. And so we come to the end of this brilliant conversation. I wanted to read the last poem of yours to conclude Abstract Oralism. But before that, or instead of that, let me just check if there are any questions. Somebody says, could you share something more on embroidery, mochikam and Kachchi taco, and something also on Ajrak? Is it safe to say Ajrak came to Kachch from Sindh? I think.
Yes, yes. In fact, they were all joined earlier. So it's more in Sindh than it is in Kachch. But there are various families that are still there in Kachch. So it's there in both the countries now. There is a poem called Aaj Rak in the collection, which describes and in fact highlights their situation of the people who make ajrak and their precarious situation.
Beautiful. So shall I read Abstract Oralism and conclude, Yamini?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, others could post questions in the meanwhile as Anjali reads on.
I have allowed everyone to unmute. Whoever wants to ask a question can unmute and ask.
Okay.
All right. All right. Abstract Oralism. Rickshaw driver thanked in mother tongue, Achai Ja. Public domain shifted. Pocketing oral chronicles, antique, got, and caustic. Talks turned to fables, words from atypical faces formed sentences with aloof attention, witness consciousness, expanding awareness towards a shared illuminism. Heard what limp sync left behind, dotting a dharki of abstraction from memory, signs got symbolic, truths a belief, for I listen, and entreated names at the end.
Lovely.
So
Thank you so much,
Anjali.
Anjali.
Thank you.
You in fact, your unearthing of the book is like a methodical desquamation. You know, it's like peeling one layer after another and getting into the deeper aspects.
For it to ever finish. And I suppose that is one of the reasons why you chose to do this in poetry rather than academic text. And I'm so glad that you did this.
So I thank you for saying that, because it was a very difficult decision. In fact, I also continue to write research papers on the various issues that come to my understanding, and as I research more and more. But as I sat down to write this, it all just, flowed in verses. So Jahana Paunche Ravi was the kind of mindset which I feel that for a land like Kachch, which hardly gets any kind of attention, be it political, national, cultural, or identitarian, it was imperative that it gets at least some ground.
Yes. So this is just the beginning, let us hope. And are there questions? Does anybody want to ask anything? But people have appreciated your talk, Yamini. A lot of people over here. So I'm glad that our conversation has opened the discussion on Kachch and on your poetry about Kachch. And really all the best to you, Yamini. And
so much.
This book, again, I hold it up. Please go and buy this book and savor it over a long, long period. Thank you so much, Yamini. Thanks, Ramesh, for inviting us.
I think we'll wait for a few minutes if people have questions. And in the meanwhile, I also want to thank all the people, some friends and family members, as well as other people from the Asiatic and other friends and poets who have joined, professors, my guide. A lot of them have joined. And I want to thank each and every one of you for being there, for being a part of this journey in various ways. And especially Anjali, battling through COVID, you have really made this evening extremely special, and doing all the hard work, even with your frail voice, you managed to do this. It's a lot. It's a tribute to our decade-long friendship. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that.
Thank you very much, Anjali and Yamini. I call upon Renu ma'am to give the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Ramesh. So on behalf of Asiatic Society of Mumbai and Mumbai Research Center, I thank both our panelists today, Yamini Dand-Shah and Anjali Purohit, for taking us through this wonderful journey and actually making us aware of so many different facets of the Kachch region and women over there in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. We will call this
so much
a day.
Yes.
Good night, everyone.
Right, ma'am.
Good night.
Good night.